Hernando County Sheriff Al Nienhuis here again with Just the Facts podcast, and I'm joined once again with Cold Case Detective George Loydgren. And this episode, we're going to be talking about another cold case that has some twists and turns, and it goes way back, probably before a lot of our viewers were even born, back to the early 1970s. So, George, why don't you take us back? What transpired back in 1972? It was kind of around I-75 and 50. The sheriff's office got a call, and tell us a little bit about what happened just prior to that, how the call came about, and then what we found once we got there.
Okay, Sheriff. So July 19th, 1972, deputies were called out to this location down on High Corner Road. They respond and get down to meet with the people who called. We take them down to the end of the block, which is actually the end of or the back part of Withlacoochee Forest. And there's a woman there who had been dead for some time that was found by the teenage boy he was riding his motorcycle, and his motorcycle broke down the end of the block, and he sees this woman there. He thought it was a mannequin. He wasn't certain. When he realizes it might be something important, he gets on his motorcycle back to the house, gets his brother-in-law, who's older than him. They come back and they investigate, and they say, yeah, that looks like a person. And then they call the sheriff's office to come out.
Okay, so this was way back in 1972, and obviously the sheriff's office came out there, and there wasn't a tremendous amount of evidence collected. If I remember correctly, there was really only, other than what little bit of clothing she was wearing, there was one piece of evidence that kind of played into the investigation, but the investigation did take some twists and turns, and we'll get into those. But initially, was she covered in anything?
She had undergarments on,
right,
and she was wrapped in a bedspread, like a blanket.
Yeah, and it was kind of, I've seen pictures of it. Unfortunately, some of the evidence over the years sent away to labs and maintained here. And, over the decades, unfortunately, a lot of that evidence either didn't come back from the lab, and, who knows what happened to it. Obviously, long before you and I came to the sheriff's office. But I think that blanket was a little bit unique, and I think, again, it's important for our listeners to know it kind of played into some of the investigation going forward. It was, what did it look like?
Yeah, so it was like a bedspread, and it had three corners and a rounded corner on one end. So we did some investigating into that. I had my Bernadette, who volunteers with me, took the information from the bedspread and recolored it so we could have something to show people in a like a bolo poster, which I would use at all my Citizens Academy presentations to ask people, hey, did anybody know where this style of blanket was used, where it originated from? Is there anything in particular specific about it? So it was unique in that sense, where it had three corners. It was about the size of a twin or full bed maybe, and a rounded fourth corner.
Okay, so it was a little bit unusual. So initially, if I remember correctly, the witnesses that called us said that they may have seen maybe some suspect activity, and I think some suspects were developed pretty quickly. And tell us a little bit about those individuals and kind of what led initially to these individuals who actually were criminals and became suspects in this.
So a witness at the scene or close nearby the scene one evening, an older woman sees a vehicle drive down the road, and that's added to, it was ironically enough her son who discovered the woman at the end of the road days later. So around the 15th of July, she said she had seen what she believed to be a Ford Falcon that was uniquely cut down in the back. I think like they have the Ranchero they made at the time. So it was like an El Camino, but Ford's version in the 60s. So ironically enough, right after we respond to take this report and collect this information, about a mile and a half to the interstate, there's a gas station at the time, and there just happened to be the same type of car that had broken down around the same time at that gas station. So at the time, deputies ran the vehicle. They got the registered owner and detectives from our agency, and they found out that the vehicle was registered to a man by the last name of Holland who lived in Tampa. Well, they go and end up speaking with him, and he said, well, yeah, I had two vehicles. I have two of the same type of vehicle. So we knew that there was two vehicles registered to the man. Also at the same time, what ends up happening is there's two young girls who are both from Brooksville. They meet some boys a little bit older than them, 18 to 22. The girls were 13 and 15. And they take a ride with these boys who drive them to Alabama. While they're in Alabama, the one girl wants to come home, and she tells the 15-year-old, Marion, I'll just use her first name, confides in the other girl, Connie, and says, I didn't want to come here to Alabama. I'm going to call the police when I get home. So Connie goes to the rest of the group, and they talk about it, and they say, okay, well, we got to get rid of her. So they go to take her to the bus stop, is the ruse they used, and instead they take her out to right on our state line border in Alabama, where they all partake in sexual assault on her and murder, and then they bury her. So the victim's dead. Now those boys who went to Alabama are driving the same car, the Ford Falcon, which is also owned by the man Holland. His son drove the car to Alabama with a bunch of his friends. So then some of them come back, and according to Connie, who is the girl with her, with Marion, the victim, on the ride back is where they might have picked up a hitchhiker, and Connie says, gee, I think I saw that blanket in the back of his car, meaning Holland.
So they became excellent suspects in
Yes.
this particular case, and I think for many years, and that was all developed relatively early in the case, if I remember correctly. Even before you got the case, those suspects were developed.
Oh,
right?
yes, we're right back around that time, because when they end up killing Marion in Alabama, they drive back immediately where the two of them lived in the Tampa area. Law enforcement from Alabama reached out to Tampa PD and our agency, and one of our detectives at the time went to help and grab the two guys in Tampa for the crime they committed in Alabama.
Okay. So I guess a couple things for our listeners, it's important to realize that although we thought it was related, we didn't even know the identity of our victim, because our victim, the young lady found in the blanket, was obviously not either the two girls that you were mentioning, because one of them was murdered up in Alabama and the other one survived and became a witness. And nobody would admit to seeing this happen, or nobody testified against the other saying, yes, it definitely happened, and so there wasn't enough there. Although they were excellent suspects, there wasn't enough there to make an arrest back then or even later. And what really complicated the matter is we didn't even know she was a Jane Doe. She was obviously buried as a Jane Doe, and so the case really stalled up until the last 5 or 10 years. So tell us what happened. I know, last episode we talked a little bit about DNA and genealogy and all that stuff. So tell us what happened in this particular case.
Sure. So I started looking at the case sometime in 2015 because our victim was a Jane Doe. The first steps was, before we can investigate anybody, is try to find out who she is. Mm-hmm. Maybe look there at who she was. Generally, when people go missing, it's who's closely associated with them is a good place to start for information, and they're possibly a suspect.
Right.
So we wrote an exhumation order and I got Dr. Erin Kimmerly from USF and her group at the time, and the medical examiner's office, and we went up to Brooksville Cemetery where we exhumed her. Once the medical examiner took custody of her remains, we got a sample of their bone and sent it to University of North Texas to give us a sample of her DNA. That took some time because they do it for the entire nation for free, and we got a full DNA sample.
And about how long did that take? I don't know if you have to look at your notes.
So to get that sample, I think took us probably about 6-7 months to
Okay.
get that DNA back from University of North Texas. And they said, okay, we have a full profile. We've now entered it into the national database for missing persons.
Right. And what kind of luck did we have there?
We're none. We struck out, just nothing there. It's an old case, and so no associations in the database.
Okay. So what'd you do next?
So I started to run down some of the individuals who were involved in the sexual assault and murder of Marion in Alabama. Most of them were dead, but I still had a few people surviving. So I reached out to those survivors and looked for other people who might have been associated with them, family members of some of the suspects. I reached out to Alabama State Department of Corrections, and I got everything they had on all the suspects, because most of them only did 3 to 5 years in prison at the time. Why? I have no idea. But they didn't do much time.
It was pretty brutal what they did to this young girl in
Yes.
Alabama.
Yes. The one who got the most time out of it was Connie. She got 7 years in Florida as a juvenile in one of our facilities. Everybody else in Alabama was out by 5 years. So from the notes and the information I received from the Bureau of Prisons in Alabama, 2 key people there were the real, especially one was very evil, and he had done a lot of things prior, according to the information that the investigator collected during their stay in prison.
Prior to killing the girl in Alabama.
Yes,
okay.
correct.
Okay.
So based on that, I started running down people to interview, trying to see if this man or this group was responsible for our Jane Doe's murder, because it was almost identical to what was done to Marion. And so we have these violent people crossing paths of our victim. I mean, what's the chances of having more than one group of violent people? So I ran down some people there and interviewed them. I took the DNA when, at the same time, we had a break, genealogy again came online. So I sent the DNA to the lab, and I sent it to Parabon Labs, which is another genealogy lab. At the time, the material they got from us and what they could do with it, they weren't able to develop the profile they need to search the genealogy site. So they suggested I send it to a private lab. So we sent it to another private lab, and they were only able to get a partial DNA sample, again, for the genealogy. About a year after that, I spoke with the manager at Parabon again, and he suggested we send it to Marshall University in West Virginia, because they had had some luck and they were able to get DNA from tough samples. So we sent it to Marshall. Marshall, and this took about eight months with Marshall, but they were able to develop a profile that's able to be used by the genealogy lab. So now, through the years, all these steps and all the other interviews, now it comes up to like 2020, 2021 now, where I have a good enough sample. Parabon's not able to do it now. We send it to Othram Labs, another genealogy lab, which we spoke about last week. So I sent it to Othram. They got it, and they had it for about 8 months before they were able to develop a profile, and they were able to have an association for us.
Well, I think even before we reveal that we were able to identify a victim, and I guess we probably shouldn't even though she's deceased, we probably, because she was a victim, but I think we talk about this in 5 or 10 minutes, but
Yeah.
we're talking over years, and you and I talk a lot of disappointments, because every
Yeah.
time you send something to a lab, it's almost like buying, and we talk about this, it's like buying a lottery ticket, and
Yeah.
you're really, really hoping that they're going to come back with some really good news.
Right.
And unfortunately, more often than not, the news is not good. There's not enough sample there, or there's not enough markers to do a comparison and so forth. But we have now got it to the point where they could do a comparison, and they did identify. And I know we talked about before, whether you're talking about suspects or victims, sometimes genealogy, depending on how far up the family tree it goes, sometimes you can have a whole lot of people. And I don't even recall
Right.
on this one, were they able to narrow it down pretty quickly to 1 or 2 people, or did you have to look at a bunch of different people to figure out who our victim actually was?
Well, in this particular case, they were pretty much on point to say, this is who we believe it to be.
Okay.
So really only one person. And she's from Kentucky, small town Kentucky.
Really.
So-
And ironically enough, doing some research, this particular individual was never listed as missing, if I remember correctly.
Correct. She had come from a small town in Kentucky, married, and had 2 children. Now, the backstory, after I now reach out to contact them, she had an abusive relationship with her, that time husband, who was abusive to her and to her children, and she
And this
just
is-
left.
This is in Kentucky.
Correct.
So she left this abusive relationship in Kentucky. So obviously, I think I remember what you and I talking about this kind of in the middle of that. We started thinking that he might be, because I mean, if I remember correctly, he was very abusive, physically abusive. Sometimes would even use. Did I remember you saying something like use chains or
Yes.
something like
Yes.
that? Yeah,
Yeah.
on her or the children when he would abuse
And
them.
he,
So
and he had his kids, according to the one son I spoke to, beat their mother with chains.
Wow.
Also, so definitely very
a very
abusive.
dysfunctional. It doesn't even begin to
Right.
illustrate that family. So she takes off. She leaves, so she leaves. Nobody really knows where she went. Up at that point, the family and so forth, they just said she left, and maybe, I don't know, did they even have indication she came to Florida?
Well, in my initial contact with them, when I speak to her granddaughter and her son, and then some cousins, that's where they made the DNA association from. No, they just told me that she had left and an abusive relationship and possibly went to Florida. And that's
Okay.
all we had.
That's all we had. So we put some information out trying to help, that we had this individual who was the victim of murder, and we were trying to, we had put out publicly, trying to get more information, if I remember correctly.
Yeah,
right?
we at the time, I took the blanket, and then we had, in the interim of all this stuff, we had facial reconstruction done in 2015 with Dr. Kimmerly. They had a symposium down at USF, and we had an artist do a facial reconstruction of what she looked like or
Right.
could look like. And then in 2018, we had a company called Face Logics that came online, and they also did a reconstructive look of they give you more of the real person look, not the clay reconstruction. And they did that as well. So we sent those 2 images and the blanket, and we sent it out on Facebook, sent to every agency in Florida from here to Alabama. And we sent it up to Alabama. It was Genesee County was the area, Slocum, Alabama, to their agency. And we even contacted the people on the farm that they went out and worked on back in 1972 to see if they knew, because I talked to the man up there who was about 80, and he says, I know every worker we've had forever.
And this was our, the suspects in the Alabama murder, where they worked?
Yes, where they were.
Okay, where they work. So we were still pursuing them as suspects at that point.
Right.
Even though we had her identified. We had
Correct.
a name, or what we thought was a name. Well, we pretty much identified her at that point. And so, this person said he knew everybody, and that kind of turned out to be a dead end, if I
Yeah,
remember correctly.
nothing.
Nothing.
Nothing
Okay.
there, and I re-interviewed Connie, the woman who was in the car. I mean, everybody I could find associated with those suspects, and eventually I found the group, one of the survivors of the group, because again, 1972, we're looking 50 years later.
Right.
These guys, some of them live a tough life. They're not alive. So I did talk to a few survivors from each car, the car that was out by the interstate and the car that was relocated in Tampa with the group who committed that violent crime out in Alabama.
Right.
So it all got narrowed down to one bad guy in the group, and they all followed him, but they all partook in the act.
In Alabama.
In Alabama, correct.
But we still didn't have anything to necessarily associate them with our now identified Jane Doe.
Correct.
Right. So things kind of stall there. Then what happens? We actually, and this is where sometimes you think you know what happened, and you actually find out that you had no clue what actually happened. And, we always say it's good to be a little bit more lucky than good sometimes. But tell us about, what happened next as far as a break in the case.
So after when we spoke, I didn't want to release any information, so I was able to run down these possible suspects
Right.
from the Falcons, the Ford Falcons. And once we were done with that, we had nothing to lose at that point. Two, let's put it out there to the public. And we had a press conference, and we released her identity and with pictures that I had gotten out from the family, and we put it out there to the public. And lo and behold, a day later or so, Bernadette, again, she received a phone call.
And Bernadette is a volunteer in
Correct.
Cold Case and does a tremendous job helping you keep these cases with thousands
Yes.
of pieces of paper organized.
Oh, yeah, thank
Yeah.
God for her.
Yeah.
And she reached out to me and said, hey, I got contacted by this woman who is like a web sleuth who does stuff on the computer, and she's interested in these cases. And she did some background on your victim and found out she was married. And I was like, okay, well, I didn't get that information from the genealogy lab. And when I spoke to the family in Kentucky, they never said that she was divorced and everything else. So I said, okay. So I reached back out to the family in Kentucky, and they said, the son says, well, yeah, my dad got remarried because I had a stepmother, and this is her name. And I said, okay, you guys didn't tell me that the first time. So now they said, yeah, well, she was remarried. So I ended up speaking with the woman who, her name is Megan, here, who did the digging and found out
Gave
that
us the
she
tip.
was married. Right.
Right.
So I reached out to Hillsborough County, did some record search, because she said, Peggy was married to this guy named Jerry Lee Fletcher. So I looked into Hillsborough County records and found out she was married in December 18th of 1971.
Okay. So she was married, and then some interesting things we found out about Fletcher and his family and a business they owned.
Right.
And tell us a little bit about that.
So when I start looking at Jerry Lee Fletcher, his mother and father bought a small motel down in Tampa. They only owned it for about 3 or 4 years, from the late 60s into 73 or 74, I want to say, like 69 to 73. They owned this small motel. So I went down to go check the small motel, and we looked on reviews online and information that people throw stuff out, historians of the area. And I went and I spoke to a few people at this little motel that still exists, but not so much as a motel. Well, the rooms are so small, it's like a small economy, a kitchen apartment. You could only fit a twin or a full bed at most in there. So I found that interesting because the bedding that was wrapped around the victim. So Fletcher, obviously, he also lived at this location for a period of time. When I also look into Peggy, who now I have her identified as Peggy Joyce Nelson.
Right.
Her maiden name was Shelton, Now, Peggy, I find out from talking to family, they didn't know where she went in Florida, but we have an address associated with her living on the same road that about a mile away from where Fletcher lived in his family's motel.
Right. And if I remember correctly, you found that that it was very likely that bedspread could have easily been a bedspread out of a little motel because it was
Yes.
kind of
It was very unique.
unique.
And
yeah.
we contacted somebody in the textile industry, and they looked at it and they said this was manufactured for small motel chains in the south east part of the country back in the 60s and 70s.
Yeah.
So just another little piece to put that bedspread there.
Right. So a little circumstantial, but I think the thing that really is interesting is talk a little bit about Fletcher. We have records he got married, but
Right.
I think we found it interesting. He never reported her missing.
Correct.
And what did he do after her death?
Well, he never listed her on his other marriage applications after. They ask you who you married to previously, he skipped her and put the wife before.
So he had a wife before our
Correct.
victim, and he got married after our victim,
Correct.
but conveniently left her off of the marriage application
Correct.
as being married
Right.
to her.
No ties to her whatsoever.
Right.
So as we look into Fletcher a little more, we see that Fletcher was a suspect in a rape, an abduction and rape case in Tampa. And now, obviously, years later, when I put him in the internet, you see that he was a man who had abducted and raped and murdered a 13-year-old girl from Tampa and murdered her in Pinellas County, and then moved.
Did that happen before or after our
That
our
happened
victim?
in 1971 in August.
So around the same time.
Correct.
Oh, okay.
So actually, if you look at the timeline, August of 71, then he marries our victim in December of 71.
And she's found in
July.
summer of 72, so
Right.
6 months later.
Correct.
Yeah. Wow.
So he leaves the state and travels back up to where he has family in Illinois and Indiana, where he abducts, rapes, and murders a 13-year-old girl. So she's also strangled and wrapped in a blanket and left in the woods, just like the other victim in Pinellas who was strangled. She had some blunt trauma as well, but wrapped in a blanket in the woods, which is exactly the way our victim Peggy was found.
So we have a very similar victim by this Fletcher prior to our victim, Peggy, and one after our victim, Peggy. So
Correct.
Now, where's Fletcher now?
Fletcher is dead. He's been dead since 2014, but after the incident or what he did to a young girl in Illinois, he was found guilty and went to prison for the rest of his life.
So he died in prison.
He died in prison. Ironically enough, to show how small the world is, especially the law enforcement community, Mike Bailey, who is a retired Pinellas County detective, came here and was volunteering with me for about a year. Mike Bailey was the cold case detective in Pinellas. He got a DNA hit on Jerry Lee Fletcher for his victim. So
Oh, that's right. So
Right.
Fletcher wasn't a suspect till after he was already in Illinois doing time.
Correct.
Okay, so
Correct.
Yeah, so he had gotten away with that for several years as well. The Pinellas County
yeah,
one.
from 71 to 2011, Mike Bailey got the DNA hit, traveled out to Illinois to go talk to Fletcher, and Detective Bailey, in speaking to him, said, I don't want to, we know you did this, we know you killed Gina. I want to know about the other people you killed in Florida. So his reply back, when I talked to Mike Bailey, he said, all right, I'll tell you about the others, but I want the death penalty taken off the table. And obviously, as detectives, we don't have the power to do that or even promise that. So unfortunately, that didn't work out at the time. So Fletcher didn't want to talk anymore about his victims here, but he conveniently left out the fact that he was ever married to Peggy, which we have legal documentation. and he never reported her missing.
Yeah. So it stands to reason there's definitely probable cause. It would have, if he was still alive, we would have more work to do. But unfortunately, we can't do any
Right.
interviews or get any DNA or anything like that from him being deceased. But it's certainly beyond a reasonable suspicion, probably even beyond reasonable doubt, that he was involved in her disappearance and her murder, because there's no reason, if your wife disappears, there's no reason not to most husbands will be
Right.
quick on the phone.
Yeah, unless you
Unless
killed
you were
her.
involved in it, yeah.
Correct.
Yeah,
And then
exactly.
I also ran down a few of his ex-wives. I found through a lot of research that he tried to kill both of them. One he shot at, and she just wanted out. She told me, just wanted out of the car. He was going to kill me. And the other one he physically abused and battered her and beat her so badly that when she had pressed charges against him for it, she changed her name and moved out of the county she was living in because he was going to kill her. He told her he was going to kill her. So two of his ex-wives I spoke to both escaped with their life by getting away from him.
Amazing. But I think this, the lesson here is a couple lessons, is we never give up. We're going to keep working it. Things develop all the time, different technologies and so forth, and that's why, property and evidence and keeping that evidence for an extended period of time is very important. But more importantly is you can't take anything for granted. You can't make any assumptions. You've got to go where the facts lead you, even if it appears, these individuals take a girl from Brooksville, kill her in Alabama, and are in a car that's identical to one that happens to be associated very close to the crime scene, certainly would lead the average person to believe they were involved, but then come to find out they were likely not involved. Even though they were bad people, they were likely not involved in this one. So that's why you don't see law enforcement jumping to conclusions or making arrests too quickly. We want to make sure that we get all those leads worked to their fullest before we actually go to the prosecutor. And oftentimes we're working with the prosecutor to make those arrests. And, George, this is another one that is definitely closed with the death of an offender. And I think most of our listeners will find it very, very interesting. Certainly appreciate your dedication. You've been doing this a long time. And again, I don't think people realize how voluminous even one case is, and to juggle several of them takes a lot of work and a lot of disappointment. You gotta look under a lot of rocks and unfortunately spend a little bit of money. And I know you work really hard to try to get it paid for by some of these commissions that make money available and so forth. But it is a very long process, and you have to have a lot of patience when you're doing stuff like this. And I know you do, and I appreciate that, and I know our listeners do too. As always, we appreciate your support of law enforcement. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Just the Facts. And please, 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 if you like this podcast, hit subscribe, share the podcast, like the podcast. If you're watching us on YouTube, subscribe to our YouTube channel so you'll be notified of any upcoming episodes. And as always, stay safe.